Chapter 3, Spiritual Contact. Candace's point of view.
I'm just going to sleep, and this whole nightmare will be over.
Candace mumbled as she crawled into bed. She didn't care that she was still in her clothes. The sooner she fell asleep, the sooner she could be rid of the crazy man. The fact that he was absolutely gorgeous hadn't slipped her mind, but he could also be a psycho killer. First, he appeared in the cemetery and then in her room. The receptionist had ignored him as if his annoying presence hadn't been there. She closed her eyes with a deep sigh. Later that night, Candace's point of view. Candace had difficulty sleeping as she tossed and turned throughout the night.
Tossing and turning all night.
Candace sat up in bed and glared at the man sitting in the chair beside the double doors as he sang that ridiculous song.
Please leave.
She grumbled as she lay back in bed.
I would love to.
He said, watching her.
However, it seems that I cannot.
She sat up again and stared at him.
Why not?
She asked. He sighed.
I was hoping you could tell me.
She grumbled to herself.
How on earth would I know why you can't leave? Just go out that door and I'll even call you a cab.
She offered with a smile. Jacob laughed.
Is it were that I could?
She grunted and lay back on the bed.
Why did the woman pretend she couldn't see you? Did you sleep with her and not talk to her the next day?
She secretly hoped that he hadn't. Jacob's point of view. Jacob laughed. He laughed so hard he found himself bent over in his chair. He hadn't laughed this hard since before his father's death.
I am so glad you find me so amusing.
She muttered. He sobered as he sat up and watched her stare at him. Why was she the only one who could see him? No one had ever seen or communicated with him before. How had she summoned him here, and why couldn't he leave?
Please go.
She groaned, collapsing back onto the bed. Jacob stood up and approached the bed. Candace's point of view. Candace sat up again, her eyes wide open.
I'll scream rape.
She warned him. He grinned.
I don't think anyone would believe you.
I'm not a...
She stopped speaking as her heart pounded in her chest and head.
Not a what?
He asked, crossing his arms over his chest.
a slut.
She whispered. He laughed.
Pity. But that wasn't on my mind, Miss Candace.
How do you know my name?
She asked, astonished. He winked at her.
I heard your brother say your name.
My brother? Oh, right, after I passed out.
She paused and blinked. He chuckled.
I've never heard such a scream before, nor seen someone faint so quickly.
He shook his head and smiled. She scoffed.
I was weak after crying so much the scream drained me.
He frowned and asked.
Why the tears?
None of your business.
She grumbled.
Now, please go find another room and someone else to annoy and torture.
He grinned and said.
Nope.
He gestured around him.
This is my room, and that is my bed. And I rather enjoy annoying you.
She groaned.
Why do you insist this is your room?
He moved closer.
Because it is, Candace. Even in death, this is my room, and that is my bed.
She stared at him, having caught the words, even in death.
Who
She swallowed past the lump in her throat.
are you?
He grinned.
Why, Miss Candace, I would think you would know my name, considering you are in my bed.
Jacob Postal.
Candace whispered. Jacob's grin widened as he bowed to her.
In the flesh,
She stared at him, her eyes wide open. He laughed.
so to speak.
You can't be him.
She choked out.
There's no such thing as ghosts.
He laughed again, saying,
I thought the same thing when I was alive. But I will let you in on a secret. We prefer to be called spirits.
You're nuts.
She said, her eyes open wide as she stared at him. He chuckled and said,
I'm not the one talking to a spirit.
You're not real.
He stepped forward and she emitted another ear-piercing scream. Grady and Anne-Marie burst into the room, panic-stricken, and stared at Candace, who was staring into nothingness.
Candace,
Anne-Marie said, gently shaking Candace's shoulder. Candace stared at the man whose legs had walked right through the bed. He stood there in the middle of the mattress, smiling at her.
Candace,
Grady shouted. Grady's voice penetrated her mind and she looked at her brother. She blinked several times as her mind cleared.
are you okay?
Grady asked, gently holding Candace's shoulders. Candace looked from her brother to Jacob Postal. Jacob was still standing inside the bed, smiling at her. Jacob pointed to the others in the room and said,
They can't see me.
Candace,
Grady shouted, shaking her. Candace looked at her brother and whispered.
I'm sorry.
What happened?
Anne-Marie asked.
Bad dream.
Candace answered.
you scared us half to death.
Grady complained. Candace smiled.
I'm sorry.
She said again.
I'm okay now.
Grady.
Anne-Marie said, tugging on his arm.
She's smiling.
She whispered in his ear. Candace could hear her friend as she spoke to her brother in his ear. Grady smiled and kissed Candace on the cheek.
Change into your night clothes. It will be more comfortable.
He said as Anne-Marie pulled him out of the room. Candace smiled and waved at her best friend. Once the door was closed, she could hear voices in the hallway, but she ignored them as she knelt on the bed in front of Jacob Eugene Postal Jr.
How are you here?
She asked, waving her hand through his legs. Jacob and Candace, double point of view. Jacob inhaled sharply as her hand passed through him. It felt as though he could feel her touch. Candace withdrew her hand, a tingling sensation coursing through it as if she had truly made contact with him. Candace's point of view.
Why can I see you?
Candace asked, looking up at him. By the expression on his face, she could tell he had felt her touch as deeply as she had.
I don't know.
He whispered.
But no one else can see you?
She inquired. He shook his head and said,
Only you.
That's weird.
She whispered as she lifted her hand again and waved it through him to see if she could feel it again. And she did. She looked up and saw on his face that he had felt it too.
It seems that I can't leave your side.
He grumbled as he walked out of the bed and moved over to the double doors. He stood there, gazing through the glass door at the cemetery beyond.
I have never seen a ghost before.
She paused as he turned to her.
I mean spirit.
She corrected herself. He smiled.
Never?
She shook her head as she crawled off the bed and walked over to stand in front of the other door. After gazing at the cemetery for a minute, she turned to face him.
I guess I'm the first person to see you in 10 years. I mean, the first of the living.
He nodded without looking at her. She smiled.
Don't you find this exciting?
He finally looked at her.
You sure are accepting and chipper, especially after those horrifying screams.
She laughed.
Sorry. I have been feeling so wound up for the past few days. It seems that once I saw your grave, everything flooded out all at once.
Jacob's point of view.
Ah, yes, my death is so
Jacob glanced at Candace and recalled her screams.
earth-shattering.
She smiled, then frowned.
Your brother and his girlfriend seem to get a perverse satisfaction from your tears. Then they return and are pleased to see you smiling.
She chuckled.
Yeah. They've been waiting 3 days for me to cry.
He turned to her.
They wished for you to cry?
He asked, raising an eyebrow.
To show any emotions, really.
She said, staring out the glass door.
I've been emotionless for the past 3 days, until today.
He watched her for a moment, then sighed. Perhaps that was why he had been drawn to her and couldn't leave. Maybe she needed human contact as much as he did.
What happened?
He asked. Candace's point of view. Candace observed Jacob Postal, or rather his spirit.
How strange is this?
She thought, shaking her head.
Turn around.
She told him. He eyed her and she laughed.
I need to change into my night clothes.
He nodded toward a door and said,
Private bathroom.
Her eyes widened as she glanced in the direction he had indicated.
They didn't mention that to me.
She said, moving toward the door. Jacob's point of view. Jacob smiled as he watched Candace.
You were so torn up before you went to the cemetery that you didn't explore your room?
She turned to him with a forlorn expression, causing his stomach to clench.
What happened to her to make her look that way?
Candace's point of view. Candace turned away from Jacob and entered the private bathroom. She loved the stunning bathroom. Off-white walls with floral trim at the ceiling and a beautiful large jet tub with a shower. A beautiful sink and countertop, crafted from oak and marble, added an elegant touch.
They didn't change it.
Jacob said, peering around the door. Candace turned to him and found him so close that if he were alive, she could reach out and kiss him.
Stop it, he's a spirit.
She scolded herself.
That's a state-of-the-art jet tub, and it's big enough for two.
Jacob said, winking at her.
And I bet you know that from experience.
She remarked. Jacob laughed.
Jealous?
Candace grunted and passed through Jacob as she returned to the bedroom. Once again, she felt the tingling sensation but chose to ignore it.
I don't even know you.
She retorted. Jacob's point of view. Jacob chuckled. He'd felt the odd sensations again when she'd passed through him.
What did it mean?
Jacob wondered.
We can change that.
He teased. Candace turned to Jacob and smiled.
You really are a scamp, aren't you?
He laughed and shook his head. He already liked her.
So do you?
She asked as she placed her bag on the bed and rummaged through it.
Do I what?
She looked at him and asked.
Do you know from experience?
He laughed. She sure looked a tad bit jealous.
No, Miss Candace. I do not know from experience. And I have never had a woman in the tub with me.
A man?
He looked at her, astonished. When she looked back at him, he noticed the playful sparkle in her eyes and smiled.
You are a little minx, aren't you?
She laughed.
I've been called worse. Now, if you'll excuse me.
She sidestepped him, making her way to the bathroom without making contact. He watched her, then stepped aside to allow her to close the door. He smiled and stood back. He could tell she'd felt the sensations from touching him. An hour later, Candace's point of view. Candace emerged from the bathroom in her nightgown, her hair still damp. She didn't see Jacob sitting in the chair as he had previously, nor did she see him standing at the door. Her heart sank into her stomach. Did he leave her?
You look all clean.
She turned her head toward the bed and smiled upon seeing him sitting there, his back against the headboard. He grinned at her.
Did you think I left?
She shrugged as she walked to the other side and crawled into bed. Jacob's point of view. Jacob nearly groaned aloud. When she bent over, he could see her breasts, and the light from the lamp illuminated her nightgown, revealing her enticing figure. His eyes widened in surprise. She wasn't wearing panties. Scandalous. He grinned. She was definitely his type of woman.
Candace,
Yes?
She inquired as she sat beside him.
why have you been feeling so unhappy since Saturday?
She looked at him and asked.
How did you know it happened on Saturday?
He chuckled.
Because I can add and subtract. They did teach that when I went to school. You mentioned that you had been in that stupor for 3 days.
She sighed and said.
Right.
She crawled out of bed, and Jacob nearly sank into the mattress when he caught sight of her bare-ass cheeks through the sheer nightgown. He hadn't missed being alive in the past 10 years as much as he did at that moment. When she turned to the bed, he got another enticing glimpse of her firm breasts, and this time he let himself groan. She gave him an odd look, then settled herself back against the headboard. Did she not know what she did to a man? Even a dead one.
This is what happened.
She said, holding up an envelope for him to see. He looked at the envelope. She was holding it so tight her knuckles turned white.
You will have to open it for me.
He told her.
Oh, right.
She opened the envelope and pulled out a piece of paper. She laid it open on the bed for him to read, then slipped under the covers and closed her eyes. Jacob watched her for a moment before reading the note. It was the cruelest Dear Jane letter he had ever read. He suspected that Saturday was their wedding day. The bastard left her at the altar. He glanced at her, wondering who could possibly leave someone like her at the altar. Although he hadn't known her long, he could tell she would make anyone a wonderful wife.
Cold fish.
he muttered. When he looked at her, he didn't see a cold fish. He saw a hidden passion within her. She was breathing softly and he smiled. She had finally fallen asleep. He looked at the lamp and smiled when it went out, then leaned over and kissed her cheek. It wasn't physical contact, but he felt it and knew she did too. She stirred in her sleep and smiled when his lips touched her. Jacob smiled at her sleeping form, then leaned back against the headboard. He turned his head and watched her sleep. When Candace woke up in the morning, Jacob was still there watching her.